Sit down, please. Let's start.
We are gonna. The recording's begun. And because we were in the middle of something, I'm actually just gonna chaza over. We're gonna just run the Mishnah again, just to clarify it for everybody. Who was here last week? From here? Mark was here.
Everybody.
No, he was here. I think he was here. He wasn't here. Not last week. Okay, so then it's a good idea just to rerun the Mishnah for context. We'll rerun the Mishnah for context. Okay, has everybody got it? 48a. So that's Mem Ches Samad Aleph. By the way, we're moving towards the end of the third chapter. So we're going to have a reason for a big siyum soon. We'll make a big party. You'll see now. Yeah. You know, when I was a young yeshiva student in New York, I used to have a shiur inside somebody's pizza shop.
I forgot. I don't know if you remember.
He used to do a shiur. Yeah. So we used to have in downtown Brooklyn. It's near the court. It's like not like Manhattan, but it's also a very big part. And we used to have. Okay. That's okay. Okay. But whose phone is this one?
It's got the
The dongle. But this one's in through my phone, so we don't have to worry about it. Yeah. This one's. But if anybody else wants this one, with pleasure.
So let me just kind of plug it in. And if anyone else wants to use it,
with pleasure.
Okay.
With pleasure.
Okay. Thanks.
There we go. Okay. That's fine.
Next time, stop fixing it. They put a post there.
Okay, everybody. So the Mishnah said that we're talking over here about Asherah trees, which are trees that were designated for Avodah Zarah. We've spoken around it quite a bit, but nothing wrong with a bit of chazara. You know what I'll do, Saul? I'll go back to the participants list and do a mute all. That might help. Okay. Yeah, mute all. Yes. Now, so basically, the Mishnah spoke about these Asherah trees that were mentioned in the Pasuk, they're mentioned in the Torah, that when the Jewish people come to the land of Canaan, they're going to find trees that the people worship. And the Mishnah was unpacking the different categories of trees that can exist, that are susceptible to Avodah Zarah, prohibited for us to benefit from.
Recording in progress.
And the most common is is what we call the Asherah tree. And it was a type of tree that was served as a deity, as an Avodah Zarah. The primary discussion in this piece, the Mishnah and the piece following it, is with regard to the tree. Everyone was in agreement that if the tree itself was planted for purposes of Avodah Zarah initially, then well and good, then for sure it's a problem. But what about a tree that wasn't planted for that purpose? It was just planted for general purpose. And later on, somebody started to serve it, or later on, somebody actually did things to the tree to try and decorate it, or to make it grow in a certain kind of way for the purpose of serving it. What do you rule out? I'm trying to summarize all the different little details that come in. What do you rule out? Do you rule out the additions, the additional? You know, when people buy a car, they call it aftermarket. If you add anything afterwards that the original manufacturer didn't put in, it's not integrated, it's called aftermarket. So basically, if they made the tree originally for Avodah Zarah, well and good, but what happens if the tree was planted for beauty? The tree was planted because people wanted a garden with trees, and only afterwards, in a sort of aftermarket way, idolaters came along and started playing with the tree, as botanists would do. They cut holes in parts of the trunk or the branches in order to cause it to grow in a special way, or they grafted connections from other trees or into the ground, all different ways of doing an action on the tree that shows that the reason for the action is to start to use the tree wrongly for Avodah Zarah. And this is where the machlokes develops. Machlokes meaning the difference of opinion between different sages. start to play around with a tree and you do different things to it in order to serve it for Avodah Zarah, what is the status of the tree? And the reason it's important with regard to a tree is we saw earlier that when it comes to natural things like mountains and rocks and trees, it's more complicated to make them susceptible to Avodah Zarah. Not impossible, but more complicated. That because it's planted in the ground and because of the fact that it's a natural phenomena, it's not going to naturally become susceptible to Avodah Zarah like a statue or a monument or something that was completely man-made and in a sense completely detached from the ground, or if it's attached, it's some cement or grout, it's a temporary attachment, it's not the same thing. But this is the discussion around the tree. And last week we said, we'll read the words of the Mishnah again, that Shalosh Asheres Hain, there are 3 different Asherah trees. The ones we've read already, I'll try to read a drop faster. There was Ilan Shinatoim, Etchila L'Shem Avodas Kechavim, as we were speaking right now, the type of tree that was initially planted to be served and used for Avodah Zarah. That one is a problem. Harei Zoya Surah, that's completely prohibited because that was the intention of the planters. They planted this to serve idols. And therefore, it is the opposite of Kedusha, of holiness. It is Avodah Zarah, and it cannot be used. And in fact, is generally speaking irredeemable. Maybe sometimes it can be revoked. There can be a revocation by a Gentile person who was serving it and then decides that it's no longer a god. He opens up his God book and he decides that he no longer likes his tree religion, and and he decides to go and serve other things, and he revokes the status. But then the Mishnah, as a second category, talked about a situation where a person made certain changes, gardening changes, maybe botany changes on the tree, in order to make it grow a certain way, decorate it, cause it to go in different directions. You know, like the farmers or the people running trees can do. You can put it in metal frame, straight. You can guide the branches in certain kind of ways by tying them. So not in a very intense way, but in a general way. Gido Yopisaloi, he basically either cut a piece out the trunk, which then motivates it to grow in a certain way, or he pruned it in a certain way so that at least it should carry on growing according to the way he wanted. L'shem avodas kechavim, again, this was done in order to cause this tree to become an avodas kechavim tree, a tree that would be utilized for avodah zarah. And in fact, it regrew. He got results from what he did. You know, sometimes you do something, especially when it comes to nature, trees and plants, you know, you also got to hope that it rains and it's fertile, and it's not for sure. It's not like a basic human art. But if it regrew, and now he wants to revoke the avodah zarah status of the tree. And basically the discussion in the Gemora, we're still in the Mishnah, but the discussion in the Gemora would be, what kind of hold does that have on the status of the tree? We already said that if the reason the tree was planted in the first place was avodah zarah, that's a problem. But what about additionals? Do the additionals make it also into an avodah zarah tree because of the fact that he did additional things? In fact, as the Gemara will later differentiate, sometimes the person just serves it. He doesn't do any action. He walks past and he starts serving it. But in this case, he did more than that. He got involved with it. He initiated it. By the way, sometimes with the laws of property and different things in Jewish law, one of the ways you make it yours is by doing something to it. You know, if there's a machlokas over a property, now in the old days, you didn't have the deeds office like you have today. So they would be looking for certain chazakas. Did the person go into the property and paint it and build it and use it and put things up? That would all
markers on the borders.
Put markers on the borders. All those things would have an effect on the status of the property and on its status becoming his, even in Dinei Mamoinus, in monetary law. If you and I were in a court and I was saying, I never really sold you my property, and you did, the people around might say, well, he renovated it, and everyone saw for years and years, and nobody stopped him, and he did all kinds of things. So that shifts what that property is about. And here in the laws of Avodah Zarah, there might be a similar scenario, that if he goes to this tree and he starts to cut it and mold it and cause it to grow in a certain kind of way, and we know that he's an idolater and he's using it for that purpose, maybe it's just as good as if he planted it for Avodah Zarah, because he did so much to it for that purpose. But in short, what the Mishnah says is all you have to worry about is the regrowth. No tomashe hechalif, take off or remove what you added. And that's good enough. Then the rest of the tree will be okay. That is the opinion of what we call the Tana Kama, or the Tana. Well, there's actually not more than one Tana. That's the opinion of the Tana of this Mishnah, the anonymous Tana of the Mishnah. The Mishnah doesn't say the name of the Tana. That's, by the way, the structure of Mishnah is sometimes you get names and you know exactly whose opinion is whose and who has a machlokes with whom. And sometimes you get a Mishnah that doesn't have an obvious author, but then you go to the formulae. There's different formulae that the rabbi stated that certain anonymous Mishnahs were put to certain authors by rule. If they were about money, if they were about this, if they were about that. So here we have an anonymous Mishnah giving these views that the trees that were planted for Avodah Zarah are prohibited. Trees that were something was pruned or added, you can take away the addition and it's okay. And the last category was if he put under the shade of the tree Avodah Zarah, they said this is a nice place to put up a monument or an idol statue, because we've got shade here and we've got a bit of coverage and foliage. You were asking where we saw our Shabbos project. We put the chairs and tables under the trees. No garden umbrellas. The trees provided the shade. And so here, that's shade for a holy thing, for a Shabbos project lunch. Here the shade is for the opposite, in order to serve something that is Avodah Zarah under the shade.
What about Father Heaven?
Yeah.
This area.
That was on Shabbos.
Yeah.
At least it waited for the afternoon. So that was the Mishnah. And then we started to read the Gemora as well. Yeah. We started to read the Gemara as well. If you remember, we did read this. Rabbi Yanai's students and Yeshiva commented on this Mishnah. This is the halacha when he sank or he grafted. But gufay shel ilan, with the body of the tree. Meaning, they wanted to qualify. What does it mean when we say that the person cuts a bit into the tree, into the trunk, or maneuvers the branches? We're talking about a very serious action that affects the major body of the tree, where you're either going to graft, we spoke about that, where you're either going to graft branches to connect the tree to another tree or plant, or produce another connected tree from it, or you're going to sink things into the ground, which are eventually going to have their own roots. When you're talking about a serious action like this, then you're basically showing that you're making a serious change to the tree. And although the tree had a neutral status before, it no longer has a neutral status. It now has an Avodah Zarah status, a status that was demonstrated by the action of these people, that they're now going to use this tree for Avodah Zarah. So in other words, it would seem that the way Rabbi Yanai are saying that a plain light pruning or cutting, that generally speaking is going to cause it to grow generally in a different or additional way, is not good enough. It must be a very serious tree expert who knows exactly what he's doing, because he comes and he does an act of grafting or shoots into the ground that have roots. That's what the Tana of the Mishnah means. And the Gemara opposed that, and the Gemara said, now hold on a second. Pruning is pruning. We learned about pruning and chopping. We didn't say in the Mishnah that it has to be this very exotic form of causing it to graft or causing the shoots to be sunken into the ground. So this qualification is rejected by the Gemara. It would seem that even an ordinary kind of action on the tree is enough to, number one, dedicate the tree to Avodah Zarah, cause us to watch what grows from here onwards. So therefore, what happens now is the Gemara says it can't be like that. It must be that what the Tana, the author of the Mishnah, the Tana in the Mishnah, was saying can be and should be taken literally, that a mere pruning and a mere grafting is enough to dedicate the tree to Avodah Zarah. So the Gemara explained, and it said, what we did, this is a plug-in over here. We plugged in Rabbi Yanai's statement into the wrong place. Sometimes it's not what you're saying that's wrong, it's where you put it. When there's a comment or an observation made, or a footnote or whatever, you have to be careful where you place it. Somebody can walk out of here saying somebody commented that this or that wasn't correct. Which thing did they comment about? Maybe we got wrong, not the comments, but we got wrong about when it was said and what it was said about. And that's what the Gemara is suggesting over here. This format, and it's always good to catch the style, because one of the things, we don't learn a lot of Gemara in an hour a week, but one thing we can catch, you can sample the style of the Gemara. And the style of the Gemara is, this is a certain way of answering something, where we say, Elo ki itmar de Rabbi Yanai, when we learned Rabbi Yanai's statement, we plugged in the statement in the wrong place. Rabbi Yanai's yeshiva was not commenting on the pruning, and it wasn't commenting on the chopping. It wasn't saying in the Mishnah that the way that you handle the tree has to do with whether or not it's now dedicated to Avodah Zarah. The Mishnah said clearly that plain pruning is okay, and he's going to agree with that. What he meant to say was a different thing. He meant to say that if you want to revoke the status of the tree as an Avodah Zarah tree, you want to say that this Gentile says, I'm no longer going to serve this cult of mine, which bows down to trees. Now you want to allow him to cut off the additional part that was dedicated to Avodah Zarah. You might think that's only good if it's a mere ordinary part. But what if somebody came along and very professionally pushed branches into the ground and caused them to grow roots? What if somebody came along and he knew how to graft and grafted new branches into the tree, connecting them with the tree and causing them to grow with it as one entity? We might assume, which again is a very common Gemara phrase, the Gemara will assess an assumption. Interesting, it will assess a way of thinking which it is negating anyway. We might assume, we might think that because it is such a, how would you call it, detailed and complex move to cause a tree to get additional roots, to cause a tree to have a grafted part, or a new vine, like a vine, a new shoot, somebody might say this is the same as planting it. What you've really done is planted it. If you walk into somebody's house and he's given it such a facelift that you don't recognize it, he'll say, do you like how I renovated? You might say, you didn't renovate it. You basically rebuilt it. I don't see anything from what was there before. What you've done is basically built a home. You didn't renovate, you rebuilt. So maybe the same thing applies here, that we'd say that if a person did so much to the tree, that he caused it to have a whole new roots and sub-trunks, and he caused it to be grafted to other places, we might say, hold it a second. You didn't do any additionals here. You didn't renovate the tree. You grew a new tree. It's the same thing as if you planted it. And in this halacha, that's a problem. Because if you did all of that for Avodah Zarah, then you basically planted a tree for Avodah Zarah. We're not worried that maybe once upon a time it wasn't planted for Avodah Zarah. You did so much and such a complex action that we're going to consider it as though you possibly made this tree initially for Avodah Zarah. And Rabbi Yanai's point was to negate this which we're saying, that La'inyan Bittel, when it comes to revoking the status of that tree as a place of Avodah Zarah, it doesn't matter how intense the pruning or addition was. It still can be revoked, just like the style of the Tana, the author of the Mishnah, provided you simply cut off and remove and burn and destroy the additionals. As long as you can see what was added or done on that tree, and as long as you can cut that off and get rid rid of it. The rest of the tree, which is the original tree that stood there before Mr. Avodah Zarah came along and interfered, is all well and good. That can be utilized. So if this person is coming to the experts, to the rabbis, and he's saying, I no longer want to use this tree for Avodah Zarah, even though I did a lot of hard work on it, get rid of all the hard work, get rid of the shoots and the vines and the grafted stuff and the stuff that was sunk in the ground. And then that's what the Tanna of the Mishnah's intention was. If you get it back to where it was to start, you can now exempt this tree from Avodah Zarah, from being asur or
What
prohibited.
about the natural growth of the tree?
The natural growth.
Yeah.
So it depends on the before or the after. This is a big before or after. What was there before, this tree wasn't planted for Avodah Zarah is okay. What
But
came
then it
about
was
after,
designated for.
sorry?
Then it was designated for avoidance.
So we need to,
So
so we need
all
to
the
reduce,
grass has
yeah,
to be part of that.
exactly, we need to, exactly, we need to take away the growth. You know, yeah.
The guy says, I'm about for this tree is no longer
Yeah.
How can you believe it? Maybe in his mind he's saying, no, really I'm not. But,
Allah allows
for
us to
the
believe
sake
it.
of,
Yeah.
For the sake of his
You want-
human, I'll give it
yeah.
peace.
Okay, look, that's a good point, you're right. Somehow our chazaka is that if he is mavatalit, we're entitled to believe that. We're entitled to say, I mean, look, at the end of the day, if he respected it as a deity and he stopped serving it, then he is now, and even if the reason is because he wants to sell it to me, so we should benefit from it, then he's worshipping money rather than whatever that was as a
Maybe he
god.
has to say the language in two ways, positive
Yeah.
and negative.
Yeah,
So if he does that, then
yeah.
there is a
Yeah. So I'm just reading inside what I just said. Outside, when we learned that statement of Rabbi Yanai about the way in which the tree is improved or added to, La'inyan betel itmar, it was with regard to the concept of revoking the idolatrous status of the tree that we learned it. And the lesson was, or the lesson is, in qualifying what the Tanna of the Mishnah was saying, is the af al gav the hivrich v'hirkiv, that even though this person grafted and planted or sank roots, not just stamazoi, that he climbed up a ladder and played with a few branches, but he got involved with gufo shel ilan, with the intrinsic body of the tree, making it have additional roots or branches that are grafted. So you might think it's a problem because it's as if he planted the tree. Lechatchila initially for Avodah Zarah. He not al mashe hechlif, when he takes off that which regrew, shapir dami, it is okay. The mahu the tamer, because I might have thought, I might have assumed, given the hivrich v'hirkiv b'gufa shel ilan, that because he grafted and sank shoots in the body of the tree, that this tree would appear to be like a tree that was planted initially for the purpose of Avodah Zarah, not utilized later on. And perhaps we might have assumed that this entire tree should be prohibited in the same way as another tree that was planted for Avodah Zarah would be prohibited. Milan, we are taught otherwise. Rabbi Yanai's school has taught us otherwise, that you can remove the additionals, and once the additionals are properly achieved, the removal of the additionals are properly achieved, and we have set the tree back. You know, like when you're working on computers, they have this thing called restore. You know, like when the guys run into trouble, where the data gets corrupt, or the guys, what are those pirates overseas that send scams or whatever? So you go and you get backup, or you need to restore the data, so it might say to you, when are you restoring to? In other words, if you push this button, we're going to take you back to 12 o'clock on the 5th of August. And everything that happened after that moment is going to be gone. Your IT man might say to you, I can fix the virus on your system, but I'm going to have to take you back months, or 2 weeks, or hopefully not longer than that, which means that whatever happened after that's going to be gone or restored. So in that language, if you can restore the tree to pre the day, the moment that people came and served Avodah Zarah, that restoring will revoke the status of Avodah Zarah for this tree. And then the rest of the tree won't be asur. Then we came to the part, which is where we're going to start next week, but we'll just say 1 or 2 lines now. Anyway, the Gemora said, Amar Shmuel. Shmuel spoke about Hamishtach on a person who goes and bows down to a tree. In other words, nobody designated the tree for Avodah Zarah. He did. He arrived at an innocent tree and he said, I'm going to serve this as a god and bow down to it. Toisafte Asura, Shmuel said, the additional growth is now prohibited. Meaning, again, from this point onwards, we are going to prohibit this tree because he has begun to use it for Avodah Zarah. Its original part is not a problem. Our issue is whatever grows from now onwards. Masiv Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Lazar questioned Shmuel's statement, and he says, hold on a second. From our Mishnah, we see that there's got to be action, not just action outside of the tree, like praying and doing Avodah Zarah, action on the tree. What did the Mishnah say? He pruned it for idolatry, the hechlif, and something additional grew. Noitel masha hechlif. Take off the additional that grew, which means if he pruned it and did things to cause the tree to grow additional, then yes, the additionals are avodah zarah. But what happens if he didn't do anything on the tree? He didn't prune it. He didn't do any action. All he did was pray. Then it should not be that the additionals on the tree are avodah zarah. And this is a question that Rabbi Lazar asks, and that introduces the Gemora into the next piece, which we'll do next week, which is a discussion at what level does the tree become avodah zarah? Do you actually have to do something, or is praying to it enough? But I think we'll stop it over there.
What happens if a tree's in your property and the branches go over, like in my corner, whoever owns the tree, and they went and they sat under the shade of those branches, if the actual tree is in your side, so it goes over the wall and they come and do little, what is it, under the leaves?
Under the branches on their
On
side.
their side.
Probably if you cut those branches, you find.
They interfere with the tree, so even if they did avodah zarah, it shouldn't affect.
Yeah.
But
And
if
there's
they're
a wall
using it like
between.
instead.
I think it's a good question, because we did say that if something's under the foliage or the shade of that tree, it has an effect on the tree. But again, another question is who owns it?
Yeah,
Because you've got the roots and you've got the trunk. Yeah,
yeah.
I think you'd be okay there. You might have an
You're
issue.
allowed to trim those trees, level with your property.
Yeah.
Get your affirmative to sort that.
You can sort it out yourself, you 100% legal.
Too much alcohol.
The Chaim gentleman, the Chaim.
And he built this fucking the tree, it was like really high, and they never spoke with it.
Who's that?
Who's that?
No, the late Harry was. Harry Miller, tree hanging over his, which is bothering him, and he took it, and the name got very annoying.
Not allowed to get it, keep hearing me.
They didn't talk for a few years.
Because what used to happen was branches. Kept on his window. If your tree, that's where it was.
But you get nameless and nameless.